إذا كنت تريد أن تكون على مذهب السلف تعلم مذهب السلف.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Now, so we continue tonight بإذن ta'ala with our reading through the explanation of this tremendous poem, Al-Bayquniyah, this tremendous poem in this tremendous science from the ulum al-shar'iyyah, from the sciences of Islam, the Islamic sciences. And we mentioned, just to quickly recap and revise that which we have taken, that we began talking about the first category of hadith that the author brings, rahimahullah ta'ala, and that is that he mentions أولها الصحيح وهو ما اتصل إسناده ولم يشذ أو يعل. The first of them is as-sahih, and it has a connected chain and contains no shudud or illah, no irregularity or hidden defect. يرويه عدل ضابط عن مثله معتمد في ضبطه ونقله. Someone who is trustworthy and accurate narrates it from another like him, dependable in his accuracy and ability to narrate. طيب. And then we discussed the first three conditions, which are the shurut al-thubutiyah. So we divided the conditions, the 5 conditions in total, that we divided them into 2 categories. The first one being the shurut al-thubutiyah, the affirmative conditions, and conditions that must be present. If they are conditions that must be present. And the second category is the shurut al-salbiyah, the negative conditions. They are the conditions that must not be present, that are not found within the hadith. So we discussed the first 3, which was ittisal al-sanad. First one being ittisal al-sanad, that the chain is connected. And we mentioned that ittisal al-sanad is أن يروي الراوي عمن فوقه بإحدى طرق التحمل الصحيحة, that the narrator narrates from those above him via the correct authentic means of transmission and narrating. And we mentioned an example for that. Of a chain in which has no break at any place within the chain, but the chain is muttasil, that is connected. Then we mentioned the second condition, and that is adalatul rawat, the trustworthiness of the narrators themselves. And we mentioned that the definition is wasfun fi shakhs yaqtadi al-istiqamah fi ad-din wal-muru'ah, a description of a person that necessitates uprightness in their religion and conduct. Then we mentioned the third condition for sahih, and that is tamam al-dabt. Tamam al-dabt, precision and accuracy. هو الذي يحفظ ما روى تحملا وأداء. The one who memorizes and is precise with that which he narrates, both when transmitting and relaying, without forgetting parts of the narration. And we mentioned the opposite to this, which is أن يكون الإنسان لديه غفلة عند التحمل أو أن يكون كثير النسيان عند الأداء. That a person is negligent when transmitting, or he is forgetful when relaying, and he is often forgetful. Not just that he has a lapse of memory for a moment, but rather he is constantly forgetting when he is relaying the hadith. Now we move on to and then we mention likewise ضبط الصدر and ضبط الكتابة, that dabt is of two types. Dabt al-sadr, the precision of the heart, and to relay and narrate from memory, and dabt al-kitabah, precision by way of writing, and accuracy when narrating from the book in which is being narrated from. And then we mentioned an example of both of them. طيب. Now we move on بإذن ta'ala to the shurut as-salbiyah, to the negative conditions. And we mentioned that they are two. The first one being عدم الشذوذ ولم يشذ, that is free from shudud, is free from irregularity. And what is shudud and what makes a hadith shadh? What is shudud and what makes a hadith shadh? So shudud هو الذي يرويه المقبول مخالفا لمن هو أرجح منه إما في العدد أو في الصدق أو في العدالة. It is that which a trustworthy narrator, a trustworthy narrator, someone who is maqbool, someone who is accepted as a narrator, narrates in opposition to a person who is more reliable than him, either due to them being more in number, or in their truthfulness, or in their trustworthiness. And we will come to this shortly, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, this definition, in order to understand it fully. And shudud, this irregularity, that it can occur in both the isnad and the matan. It can occur in both the chain of narration itself or the actual text. That it can occur in both places. And now we have an example of shudud. We have an example of shudud, of this irregularity that can occur. No doubt there are many examples, but we have chosen this one. This is the one that Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned in his explanation. And that is that we have a hadith, the first hadith being إذا انتصف شعبان فلا تصوموا أخرجه أصحاب السنن. That when Sha'ban reaches midway, then do not fast. This is the first hadith, and it's collected in the books of Sunan. Then we have another hadith, لا تقدموا رمضان بصوم يوم ولا يومين إلا رجل كان يصوم صوما فليصم متفق عليه. Do not proceed Ramadan by fasting a day or two before it, except for a man who has a habitual fast, then let him fast it. And this is agreed upon by Al-Bukhari and Muslim. So this or these two hadith, that from what is apparent is that they contradict each other. That they contradict each other from that which is apparent. Why? Because the first one says that it is the ruling that can be derived from the first one is that it is impermissible to fast after Sha'ban has reached halfway. Whereas the second one, we can derive from the second one that it is haram to fast a day or two before Ramadan, meaning at the end of Sha'ban, and not being halfway through Sha'ban. So from what is apparent is that these two hadith contradict each other. And the first one is collected in the books of Sunan, and the second one is collected by Al-Bukhari and Muslim. So which one is given precedence over the other? No doubt the hadith that is found in Bukhari and Muslim. So therefore, the first hadith, according to some of the scholars, that they have said that this hadith is shadh. It's an irregular hadith because it opposes that which is arjahu min. It opposes that which is more reliable or more relied upon, which is that which is found in Bukhari and Muslim. And some of the ulama, some of the scholars, that they have managed to make jam' between these two hadith, that they have managed to reconcile between the two, and have said that there is no mukhalafa, there is no differing here between the two, and we are able to reconcile between them. As I mentioned, some of them use this hadith or these two hadith as an example to show a hadith that is shadh. So they say the first one is shadh, first one is an irregular hadith because it is in opposition to that which is more reliable than it. And that's why we have mentioned here that the first hadith is collected in the books of Sunan, whereas the second hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim. So no doubt Bukhari and Muslim, that they are more reliable and relied upon in terms of their authenticity than the books of Sunan. So that's just a brief example. And again, we don't want to, the whole aim of this is to try and keep it as short and concise as possible, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So we'll mention and suffice with a brief example for now. And bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, we will look into it in more detail when we come to that bab, when we come to that chapter, inshaAllah ta'ala. What is important to know here is the definition, a general understanding of a hadith that is shadh, and an example to highlight and to show us a hadith that is shadh. So we mentioned in the definition of shudud that we mentioned الذي يرويه المقبول مخالفا لمن هو أرجح منه. So that which a trustworthy narrator narrates in opposition to a person who is more reliable than him. So this is the general definition here. إما في العدد, either due to them being more in number. Either due to them being more in number. So if we have a narration, for example, narrated by a single trustworthy narrator who narrates it one way, and then we have another narration narrated by two or more trustworthy narrators who narrate it in opposition to the first, then which one is shadh in this example here? We have one narration that is narrated by a single trustworthy narrator, and he narrates it upon ala wajhin, upon one way, and another narration narrated by two trustworthy narrators who narrate it in opposition to the first. So which one is shadh? So no doubt that the one that is narrated by a single individual, single trustworthy narrator, that would be the narration that is considered as shadh. Why? Because as we mentioned, either due to them being more in number, that they are more reliable than him, because all of them are trustworthy. But the second narration, that we have more than one individual. So we have two trustworthy narrators in opposition, as opposed to one single trustworthy narrator. So the one single trustworthy narrator's narration is considered as shadh in this instance. And then we said al fi sidq. So again, if we have one narrator who is truthful and another narrator who is more truthful, he's more reliable in his sidq, in his truthfulness, and they both narrate a narration in opposition to one another, then whose narration is shadh? That the narration of the one who is less truthful. طيب, not the fact that he is not truthful, no, but he is less truthful. طيب, so he's less truthful, or he's less reliable in his truthfulness than the other. طيب, and then we said أو في العدالة, or in their trustworthiness, or in their trustworthiness. So if one narrator is trustworthy and there is another who is more trustworthy, and they both narrate in opposition to the other, then again, whose narration is shadh? That the narration of the one who is trustworthy is shadh compared to the one who is more trustworthy. Because if he is more trustworthy, if he is more upright in his adalah, then therefore his narration is arjah, that it is more reliable. طيب. And again, inshaAllah ta'ala, that we will come to it and mention it in its proper place, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. طيب, now we move on to the fifth condition. And the fifth condition is that it is free from any illah. عدم العلة ولم يشذ أو يعل. It is free from any illah, any hidden defect. And what is a illah? Or the definition for an illah? We find many definitions that the scholars have mentioned. But generally speaking, an illah هي عبارة عن أسباب خفية غامضة قادحة فيه. That it is a term for hidden means or reasons that compromise it. Meaning they compromise the narration. There are hidden defects that are hard to spot, and they are qadiha. They affect the narration. طيب, and this again can occur in both the isnad and the matan. Can occur in both the isnad and the matan. Can occur in both the chain and the actual text itself. طيب, a brief example, and there are many examples for illah, for ilal. There are many ilal, hidden defects that the ulama have mentioned. But just a brief example here that we have عن الأعمش عن أنس رضي الله عنه قال كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا أراد الحاجة لم يرفع ثوبه حتى يدنو من الأرض. طيب. And this hadith here, that we have an illah, we have a hidden defect within this hadith, and it is within the isnad of the hadith, is within the chain of narration of the hadith. For many of the ulama that they have mentioned, the A'mash, that he never heard from Anas. It is not affirmed that he actually heard narrations from Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu. So therefore, that they have deemed these narrations from A'mash on the authority of Anas radiallahu anhu as being a hidden defect, as having an illah within them, that they are a hidden defect. طيب. Now we move on bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, and again, inshallah ta'ala, we will keep each one brief and concise as possible, and bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, that if we have time to mention it later in more detail, then we will do so bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So now we move on to a general overview of narrations that are transmitted to us. So we have three types of transmitted narrations. There are three types of transmitted narrations. The first one is that which we've already been discussing, and that is al-hadith. A hadith. And that which we have already defined and mentioned its definition as ما أضيف إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من قول أو فعل أو تقرير أو وصف خلقي أو خلقي. That which is attributed to the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم by way of statements, actions, tacit approval, or physical attributes and characteristics. This is what is considered and known as a hadith. Then we have the second type, and that is al-athar, an athar, a narration. And it is that which is specifically attributed to other than the Prophet ﷺ. So from the companions, or the tabi'een, or those who came after them. So an athar is that which is attributed to other than the Prophet ﷺ. So it is either attributed to a companion, or a tabi'i, or other than them, from those who came after them. Then we have al-khabar. And al-khabar is a general term for hadith and athar. يعم الحديث والأثر. It comprises of both the term hadith and the term athar. So this is just a general breakdown and a general overview of the different terminologies for types of narrations that are transmitted to us. And bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, what we will do is we will stop here, as we'll keep this lesson short and concise for now. And bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, next week or next lesson we will discuss and make mention of or finish up on the terminology of Sahih, and we will mention those books that have been authored or have been dedicated solely to being books of hadith as-sahihah, authentic hadith, such as the Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, inshallah ta'ala, that we'll mention that, and some of the principles and statements of the ulama in relation to it in our next lesson, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. But to keep it nice and concise, that we will suffice with what we have mentioned. ونكتفي بهذا وصلى اللهم وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين.